And now I'd like to introduce Lam Fosterhurst, who will conduct our virtual conversation tonight. Foster, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Stephanie Powers, welcome. Wonderful to see you. I must say, I have to note right at the beginning, I'm a huge fan, we spoke about this, of a very early film of yours called Experiment in Terror. Which I'm the one, which I absolutely love. I think it's almost a great film. I saw it again to prepare for tonight. It's absolutely terrific. You're great in it.
It's almost a film noir.
It's a film noir. It is a film noir. It's a complete film noir. It's the last of the classic era. But I want to tell our guests that film is 1962. All these years later, you're still working and active in the business, in theater, in film. You are truly a survivor.
Oh, well, I'm just in total denial. So I just never looked at the date. So I just keep going until somebody, one day they'll take me off the stage with a hook. And then,
but not working or not being active is simply not an option for you. Obviously, it's not part of your DNA.
No, it's not. No.
Just not. But let's go back to the beginning. You started out really with this really great film, Columbia Pictures. You were signed to a contract at Columbia at a time when the studio system was really sort of fading or disappearing.
Foster, may I just go back a little bit and say that actually my first job was as a dancer on the movie West Side Story. So I was hired after 16 dance auditions and 3 screen tests to join the company in rehearsals. So we rehearsed for a little over 2 months, and I was at the time I was almost 15, 16 years old, and I was the only minor at the time. So there were restrictive sort of rules about how many hours I could work, and I had to have a school teacher, and my mother had to be on the set. It really was silly for them to hire me. So they replaced me with the girl who did the job on Broadway. But while I was at the studio, which was Sam Goldwyn's studio, where the rehearsals and the filming took place, I met a director by the name of Tom Laughlin, who you might remember from Billy Jack. Well, Tom loved to make movies with people who really never had too much acting experience. They were sort of at the time called art films, low budget, independent films. And so he asked me to come and read for him, which I did, and he hired me. And we went away to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we did this interesting little film.
Like Father, Like Son.
Something like it had about 6 different titles. And I don't know what it was ever released under, or if it ever was released, but the most important thing was that the movie and Tom Laughlin were greatly supported by a wonderful and very successful producer in Hollywood called Jerry Wald. Do you remember that name?
Of course. And
Jerry Wald used to, he thought Tom was an up-and-coming, a wonderful performer and a producer and eventually a director. And so he wanted to help sponsor him. And Jerry Wald had the first ever home theater that I ever saw in a private house, a giant screen, almost a full-size cinema screen that came down from the ceiling, and a painting that was moved, and there were 2 35mm projectors behind the wall, and he showed our movie to all sorts of his friends, many of whom were very recognizable faces. So it was a sort of place where you'd say behind every potted palm was a recognizable face. And as a result, I was invited to join the contract players at MGM, 20th Century Fox, and Columbia Pictures to go to class with the contract players, work on a scene that would eventually be shown to the casting department, and then they would either ask you to test or put you under contract for a 7-year contract. So I was the busiest nobody in town. I was running to the studio to saying hello to the man at the gate and just charging in at MGM, where Zena Provendy was the drama coach and she was a protege of Stella Adler's, where at 20th Century Fox, where Sandy Meisner was conducting classes. Can you imagine?
It's the neighborhood playhouse.
And at 20th Century Fox, where Les Mahoney, who had been with the with the San Francisco Rep Theater, was conducting classes. So one day I was late for work. This is how I got the job. I was late for work to Columbia Pictures, not work. I was late for class at Columbia Pictures. And I used to take a shortcut through the editing department, and it was a narrow hall with the doors that you push doors, so they would swing either way. And I swung the door right into the face of a man who was wearing the same sunglasses that I was wearing. And that's important because those sunglasses were the last word in fashion on the French Riviera that minute. And in those days, anything that was the last word of fashion on the French Riviera would take about 3 years to get to California. And he said to me, "Where did you get those sunglasses?" And I said, well, I was very much a tomboy. And I said, my friend Lancer Bedlow was driving in the Monte Carlo rally, and he brought them to me. I said, "Where did you get yours?" And he said, "I was at the Monte Carlo rally." And he said, "What do you do here?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm an actress." I was 16 years old. I turned 17 on that picture. And he said, "Really? Are you any good?" And I said, "Well, no one asked me that before." I said, "Well, sure. Yes, of course I am." And he said, "Well, I'm making a movie here. He said, you ought to come up and see me." And I said, "Well, I can't. I'm late for class. I have to go to class. I can't see you." He said, "All right, come after class. I'm on the 4th floor and my name is Blake Edwards."
Oh my goodness. Okay. That was a wonderful chance meeting.
And that's how I got the part.
That's how you got Experiment in Terror.
And went under contract to Columbia Pictures.
And they put you under the traditional 7-year contract, but it was near the end of the studio system. It wasn't Harry Cohn. It was not Harry Cohn's Columbia anymore. He was gone. It wasn't the same studio as Kim Novak and Rita Hayworth. It was a different animal, really. It was the end of that period.
Well, it was ending. It was in the process of ending. So
in the process of ending.
Yes.
In the process of ending.
Because you'll recall that the decision from the United States government, the antitrust decision, came down in 1948, and the studios were meant to be divesting themselves of a part of their
theaters.
Parts of well, they were the ideal monopoly. They made the product, they distributed the product, and they exhibited the product. So the exhibiting went first. But in those days, the funny thing was that the movie business was so small, and when in its inception, that everybody married each other. It was almost incestuous. The Lowe's married the Balabans, and this one married this. So the people that owned the movie houses were all related to the people that made the movies. So they may have cut ties as far as the government was concerned, but they were still related to one another. And the divesting of the contract players came later, and that happened it was going on in the 60s.
Yes, it actually started in the 50s, but it certainly continued well into the 60s. But you were near the end. Did you accept every picture they assigned you to?
Well, I had to, otherwise I'd go on suspension and they would
So-
extend my contract. One of the movies that I did, that I was obliged to do, which was a very bad movie. I was once again appearing opposite Cliff Robertson, and Cliff had turned down so many movies, and they would extend his contractual obligation because he didn't like them, that his 7-year contract went on to double that amount of years. So he was working off, this movie was the last movie on his original 7-year contract, which lasted for 14 years.
And we have to name it, Stephanie. We have to give it a name. Love Has Many Faces.
Yes, well, it doesn't have any more faces anymore.
Now, you hate the film, basically.
Well, no, the film was so terrible. It's a great bad movie. That's what it is. It's a really good bad movie.
It's so bad. It's so
But
bad. It's actually good.
The cast is incredible. It's Lana Turner, Cliff Robertson, Hugh O'Brien, Ruth Roman, and Virginia Gray and me.
It's an incredible cast. Did you get to know Lana Turner at all?
I did, and I got to know her daughter, and I still know her daughter.
But Lana, it's not a happy part for Lana. She just has a lot of costumes.
Well, I was, I'll tell you something. The movie, if you remember the movie, so the movie was shot entirely on the beach or in the desert. And Edith Head did the costumes. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to have a costume by Edith Head. How fantastic. Well, Edith Head dressed Lana in aquamarine chiffon and spangles and beautiful, gorgeous things. And my wardrobe was entirely beige. So I blended in very nicely with the background.
Now, did you like your character? So you play a character who's pretty devious. Did you find a way of liking her?
I was just holding my nose and trying to get the lines straight. Get through it and move on.
But you moved on to something fascinating. Die, Die, My Darling.
Yes,
with
that
Tallulah
was
Bankhead.
yeah,
With
that was
Tallulah Bankhead. And that is really
well.
a good part for you. That's a good part.
Yes, and it was an extraordinary experience to work with Tallulah.
What was she like at that point?
Well, she was nervous. This was the first film she had done in 20 years. Lifeboat had been the previous film. And so when she arrived in London, she went to stay at the hotel where she always stayed during the glorious period of her great success theatrically in London. She stayed at the Ritz, and in those days the Ritz was the place to stay, and it's become again a beautiful hotel. But there was a period of time when the Ritz was a bit down at heel. You know, it was going through a really bad, unfortunate time in the 1960s, and the maintenance wasn't so good, and it had lost a lot of its former luster. So when she arrived, she went up the steps, which were very sort of semi-steep on the side where you enter the Ritz Hotel, and those stairs are covered with they have an edge that's kind of made out of brass, and it's the edge of the stairs, and I think it was probably loose or something, and she tripped going up the stairs to check into the hotel and fell backwards.
Oh.
And as luck would have it, one of those terrible paparazzi caught her falling backwards and landing on her rear. And did all of those photographs appeared on the front page of the Daily Mail the next day, saying Tallulah's, Tallulah's celebrated return to London, which put her immediately to bed. She got a terrible case of laryngitis. The doctors were called. It was a dramatic reaction. She really felt terrible, and she was already nervous about doing the film, and this was the straw that made her go to her bed. Well, everybody was very nervous, and the first few days there was a rehearsal planned specifically to make Tallulah feel comfortable, because coming from the theater as she did, she was used to doing a rehearsal, and almost everybody at the table for the reading was also had a theatrical background, including myself, and so it was a very nice thing to be able to have the luxury of doing the table read before we all began to film. Now, at that table were wonderful actors like Eutha Joyce, who was with the National Theatre, Peter Vaughan himself, Royal Shakespeare Company, Donald Sutherland's first full-length film, and the director had a great legacy in the theater. So the day arrives when we have to start rehearsals, and Tallulah arrives in a floor-length mink coat, looking very frail. And as she walks out, there's two young men are sort of holding her from under the arms, and she's walking into rehearsal saying, I'm so terribly sorry now. I can't talk, and I'm terribly, oh, please excuse me, you'll have to go on without me. So we start to read, and somebody reads her lines, and she's sitting in the corner going, oh, wonderful, 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 wonderful. And so the first week of shooting, to make it easy on her, everybody was working except Tallulah, and she would be called out just before they were going to break for lunch, and she'd have a very civilized hour to get out to the set. They'd put her makeup on, do her hair, put a wardrobe fitting, and then she'd go to lunch, and then she was in the first shot after lunch, and then she'd be released to go home. And all her filming was at a distance and walking in and out of a place or waving from a window. And on the third day, third or fourth day of that week, we would go to see what's called the rushes, from the previous day's filming, at a local a studio which was nearby. And Tallulah came along, and she had to sit through everybody else's work to see herself in a long shot, in a distance, not saying anything but waving or walking or whatever. And it gradually built her competitive spirit, so that by the time the next week started, she was in full voice and in full energy and ready to go.
Once you were working with her, was she generous to a fellow actor?
She was
you?
wonderful.
She related to you? She interacted with you?
Oh, yes. And my dressing room was next to her dressing room. And she always had a tradition of calling people by their character name, so that she wouldn't forget that as they were working together. This was her tradition. So I would hear she'd pound on the wall, and that meant to come in to see her. But unfortunately, sometimes coming in to see her was a bit shocking, because on occasion she'd be sitting naked on the toilet and with the door open, and she'd say, "Oh, Patricia, darling, you have your..." She was quite a character.
But you know, she's very good in the film.
Well, she was amazing to watch, because she had a crying scene, and the director never cut. He just had her go sit down into the shot, build herself up to the tears, and she had buckets of tears, and her nose was running and everything. And the director would say, "Now, pull yourself together. Just calm down. I want you to stand up again, compose yourself, and then sit back down and start the scene all over again." So she'd stand up. Someone would give her a handkerchief. She'd blot her eyes. Her nose would go back into perfect order, and she'd begin again. And she did that about 6 times. And I was, of course, in awe.
So she had extraordinary technique.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary technique and magnificent voice. Now, looking way ahead, many, many years later, not so many years ago, you had the opportunity to play Tallulah on stage in an acclaimed play called Looped.
Yes, yes. Well, I had been offered the play, and naturally, because the play was about what we call looping. So looping means actually if the sound wasn't good in a given scene, you have to go into a studio, watch a screen where the editor has marked a white line, and as it goes across the screen, you hear 5 beeps, and then you speak, and you can see your mouth, and so you try to loop and get the dialogue correctly according to your mouth, the movements of your mouth. And so you're actually dubbing yourself so that the sound can hear what the dialogue was. And therefore the play was called Looped because it was about a looping session. In actual fact, the play says that the looping session was in New York, in California. It was, in fact, an actual event that happened, but it happened in New York, where she lived. And the truth of the story is, which is what the play is about, she arrived 4 hours late for the session to do 1 line of dialogue. She was in her cups. She was quite, she had indulged herself very handsomely. And so she was feeling no pain when she arrived. And she couldn't quite get the looping, the rhythm of the looping session. So she'd go off in a tirade and all sorts of things. And the looping session lasted far longer, almost half a day to get this 1 line. And that's pretty much the basis of what the play is about. And I, for various reasons, I turned the play down, and my very dear friend Valerie Harper wound up doing it, and we had long conversations about why I turned it down. She said, "Yes, I understand there are problems. We're going to try and work it out." And they were 1 year on the road before they went to New York and opened in New York. And I went to see her. She was wonderful in the part. And indeed, she got nominated for a Tony. She was fabulous in the part. The play was eviscerated by the critics. They never quite fixed some of the things that they might have fixed. But in any event, we went to have supper afterward, and I said, it doesn't matter. You have this play in the palm of your hand. You can take it on tour. It's very easy to run. You're going to make a fortune on tour. Who cares what the critics said? And you'll go from strength to strength. And that's what she said. She and her husband were going to produce a tour, and all of that was going to be wonderful. And so fade out, fade in. About a year, maybe 2 years later, I was in Dubai doing, of all things, love letters. And I got a phone call from Valerie. Now, we'd both had cancer at the same time. We'd had the same kind of cancer. We'd had the same surgery with the same doctor in the same hospital 4 days apart.
Oh my.
So we knew about. We had talked to each other. We'd talked about our post-operative therapies, about all of that. So she called me and said, my cancer's come back and it's in my head and it's not good. And I was in the middle of rehearsals and I collapsed, and that's how they found it. And she said, and of course I commiserated with her over that. And she said, but look, we've invested all our own money in a 5-week tour of Looped. And if it's not done, we stand to lose a lot of money. Would you do it? Well, I said, absolutely. Yes, without even thinking twice. But in actual fact, so I finished my obligation in Dubai, went back to London, from London to New York, and I had 8 days of rehearsal. And we went to Florida and opened in the tour in Florida. So it was a very, very interesting experience.
Was part of your hesitation with not accepting the show not only structural, but did you have hesitation about doing an impersonation or about being disrespectful to Lula? Was there some hesitation about not wanting to turn yourself into her?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm sure there was an element of that, because I certainly didn't want. I was hoping. I thought, well, I'd have to do her justice. I'd really have to work a great deal on lowering my voice and in order to do her justice. And but it was mainly structural.
It was mainly structural.
Yes.
But you didn't do a caricature of her. I'm sure you wanted to do a human portrait of her.
And I think we accomplished that.
You accomplished that.
Yes. It wasn't a caricature.
Good. But you did do the voice, because we've heard a little bit of it here.
I did.
Yes. You did.
I did.
And the accent.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to the 60s again. You made so many interesting films in the 60s. One of them, I want to ask you, I've heard about this rumor for years. Is it true or not? You were in the remake of Stagecoach. And
yes.
on the first day of the shoot, your director was Gordon Douglas. And
yes.
Gordon Douglas got a telegram from
yes.
John Ford, the original director. And
yes.
in that telegram was one word,
yes.
why? Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. Yeah. That is absolutely gospel true. Yes.
Why?
John Ford sent him a one-word telegram on the first day of shooting. How intimidating is that?
So,
but we had a fabulous cast. Bing Crosby, Anne Margaret, Alex Cord, Red Buttons, Van Heflin, Slim Pickens, Robert Cummings. Who am I missing? Oh, Mike Connors. My God, what a wonderful, wonderful cast.
But there was no way that the film could replace the
No
memory,
way.
the original.
That's
with all
right,
you great people, it couldn't be done.
What can you do? You know, as an actor, you want the job, and it's a shame. You know, it very, very rarely is a remake any good. I mean, you go to remake Citizen Kane. The other night I saw what I think is actually my favorite of Orson Welles' early work, which is The Magnificent Ambersons.
Fabulous. Yeah,
It was on Turner Classic Movies the other day. Today there's a movie called Mank. The photography is terrible, but everybody's saying, oh, it's wonderful, because it's reminiscent of the period. It isn't. It's not very good, the photography. And if you look at The Magnificent Ambersons, you see the fabulous black and white photography. Then that's the kind of photography that Mank should have been done in.
In the 60s, you did a fascinating film that most of our audience won't know. In fact, folks listening out there, Stephanie was in so many interesting films in the 60s. You've got to see Experiment in Terror. You have to see Love Has Many Faces. If you haven't seen Die, Die, My Darling, you've got to see it. And you really have to see this obscure little murder mystery with a fabulous cast called Warning Shot. David
Oh yeah.
Jansen, Joan Collins, Steve Allen, Eleanor Parker, and Lillian Gish, for goodness sakes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
And
fabulous.
isn't that an interesting little unexpected movie, really?
Yeah, it was. And, I saw it again not too long ago, and it was a wonderful little movie. And there was another little movie that was in the 70s. No, not in this. Yeah, it was in the 70s. No, it was the end of the 60s. Um, or maybe it was in 1970. It was called The Paper Man with with uh, Dean Stockwell, which just was this little tiny movie that came out, and it's so good.
And Warning Shot is in that sort of hidden category. It
Yeah,
went right by you with that. You weren't in any scenes with Lillian Gish, but did you get to meet her at all?
I did. I was lucky enough to have met her. Yes.
And she's terrific in that film.
Oh my God, she's
It's just
wonderful.
she's wonderful in it. And then you worked in a Disney film with another great lady, Helen Hayes.
Oh yes, that was wonderful, and we became great friends, and all till her death. We saw each other, and I'd go up to see her in Nyack, and she was a wonderful lady. And because I had worked with her son, Jimmy James MacArthur, so that was already a bond between the two of us. I did a film called The Interns. Excuse me, my dogs. Come here. Baby. Thank you. My dog. Come here. Hey, come here. Well, talk among yourselves. I will mute myself for a second. Hang on.
Okay.
Hey. Come, Baby. Okay, come here.
Stephanie, I wanted to go back to Stagecoach for a minute. That was Bing Crosby's last film.
Yes.
That was his last film. Did it feel like it was near the end for him, or was he still wonderfully focused and present?
He was fabulous. No, there was nothing wrong with him. It was his last film, but he didn't pass away immediately there after. No, we used to sit on the set and look at bloodstock books because my stepfather bred racehorses, and he was mad about racehorses, and he was one of the part owners of Del Mar Racetrack. So he was always reading the bloodstock books, and I've always been crazy about horses. So we would look at these gorgeous horses together on the set. And talk about all kinds of funny things. He was great. He was in great form.
And he's very good in the film. He never lets you catch him acting, Bing Crosby. You never catch.
I remember seeing him on Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson said, Bing, you're so cool, and everything looks effortless for you. And how does that happen? And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a big roll of money, and he said, that helps.
What he had, you couldn't teach. He just had it.
Yeah, he was.
He was just a natural.
Oh God, I love watching High Society. He's so wonderful in that movie.
Yeah. Effortless. Now I want to get to, of course, your signature role in Heart to Heart.
Before that, we should probably go. We should probably talk about how Columbia sold my contract.
Oh yes, for The Girl from U.N.C.L.E.
Yes. So unbeknownst to me, because I was in England at the time, my then boyfriend, who was about to become my husband, was doing a little movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Gary Lockwood.
That's right. And I was fascinated by everything on that set, and I spent a lot of time with Stanley and everybody in the production. At a certain point, they needed somebody to be Stanley wanted to have an androgynous voice to play Hal the computer, and the studio MGM thought that the voice sounded too gay. So they said, no, that's so he said, you're going to pay, you're going to be Hal. So I was Hal for about 10 minutes on the set. And then I was immediately replaced by Nigel Davenport, who was a baritone Shakespearean actor. And then Stanley eventually got his way. And he was right in the first place, because the computer would have an androgynous voice, and it doesn't sound gay.
Though I've interviewed Keir Delay a number of times, and he said when he shot the scenes, it was Hal had a Cockney voice. It was just a stand-in. And the final voice of Douglas Rain, that great voice, it was just right, is not the voice that Keir Delay was playing opposite. The magic of the movies.
Yes.
Was not the voice he played opposite.
So I was called in England by my agent, who said, well, you've got to come home because your contract has been sold to MGM and you're going to be the girl from U.N.C.L.E. Well, I never worked that hard on a television series, because they shot much faster. My goodness, did they shoot fast. And all of a sudden, here we were making a show, which at the time, nobody made a comment about, but it was the first time a woman had been a star of an hour-long television series, weekly series. And we did in that year, we made 29 episodes. Can you imagine? We never stopped working. And of course, I was in every shot. So it was a baptism of fire.
But it's well remembered now, but the show wasn't a big hit at the time.
Well, it was the last year of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. as well. And in those days, usually what would happen is that the producer would go to the network and fight to try and get another year out of his shows so that the audience could grow. Because Heart to Heart did the same thing. We weren't an overnight success in the first year, but you need to build an audience. So that's when our producer at the time, although we didn't realize it and he didn't realize it, was quite ill. And so he lost the ability to, he didn't have it within him to go there and fight for us. So both The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. were canceled after that year.
But was that a disappointment at the time to you?
Yes, very much so, because I think we had found a kind of very, very 60s kind of sending up the kind of comedic way of dealing with a serious subject.
Now, did you get the role of Jennifer Hart because you guest starred in It Takes a Thief?
Well, there were quite a few movies in between, and quite a few, and another television series called Feather and Father, with the great Harold Gould, and some wonderful character actors, because Feather and Father, Feather was the name of the daughter, and her father was a con man, and all of his con man friends. So it was a kind of cute hour-long comedy investigation show. And then I was in, I went back to the theater and was doing some musicals and some straight plays and all. And I was in the midst of, we had started rehearsals for Cyrillo De Bergerac, which we were taking to Broadway. Stacy Keach was playing Cyrano and I was playing Roxanne. And we were in San Francisco doing our San Francisco opening, out of town. And I got a phone call from Robert Wagner and Tom Mankiewicz and um, um, Aaron Spelling, who were all on the phone at the same time talking to me about this pilot for a television series called Heart to Heart. And I knew all of them very well. Tom was one of my best friends. I knew RJ, I'd worked with him, and they were wonderful people. And I said, oh my God, this is an embarrassment of riches. But we're supposed to go to Broadway. What am I going to do about Cyrano? And Aaron Spelling said, well, there's a rumor that there's going to be a newspaper strike in New York. And as you know, when there's a newspaper strike, new shows don't come in, old shows sometimes close. The newspaper strike was very, very serious when it came to Broadway. Well, for me, it was the greatest newspaper strike that ever happened. I was thrilled that the newspaper strike took place and I could do the pilot of Heart to Heart.
And but they wanted you and you did it.
Yep, that was the greatest thing.
That was, the show was a huge success. 111 episodes, 5 years. Do you know why it clicked the way it did? Do you know what?
Well, as I said, it wasn't. It wasn't a hit in the very beginning. So we built an audience, and then finally, once we found the audience, then it started to snowball. But you're just busy working. You don't know how it's being received, except that the ratings are good, and you have no idea what the impact is on the people who are watching the show, because all we were doing was 14 hours, 16 hours a day working to do. We did how many episodes a year did we do? I think we did 26 episodes a year. So today they don't do that many per year.
But
should we look at some of the chats and some of the questions?
No, we'll get to those.
All right.
We'll get to those. I think as an outsider, the strength of that show depends upon the timing and the rapport between you and Robert Wagner. That's crucial to the show. You obviously like each other still.
Well, he still has my button. He just knows how to make me laugh, and he's got a wicked sense of humor, and everybody who's ever worked with him adores him. And so he is such a generous actor. It's like playing tennis with someone. You have to play with somebody who hits the ball back. And that's RJ. And I hope it's me. So between the two of us, we were good tennis players.
Very good.
And we still have a kind of wonderful rapport as friends.
But neither of you don't push. You take the material with the right way. You don't give it more than it is. You approach it with just the right touch. It's hard to play that kind of light comedy, really. It's hard to play it, but you both do it deftly.
There's that old theatrical story about the actor who's dying on his deathbed, and another actor comes to visit him and says, "Oh, dear boy, oh, I feel so terrible." And the actor who's dying says, "No, no, no, no. Don't worry. Dying is easy. Comedy is difficult."
Exactly. Yeah, you make it look easy, but I know that it isn't. I do want to hear about Lionel Stander, who's a fascinating character. He'd been blacklisted, of course, and he'd had to go to Europe to extend his career. And now he comes back and has a hit in an American TV series. Did he
Yes.
talk about the blacklist? Was he bitter about that period?
How can I say it? Lionel was an anarchist. Lionel just loved to stir things up. But you know, Lionel's early career, which we mustn't minimize. At one point, I think he had 4 plays on in Broadway, 3 of which he produced, and 2 of which he produced, 1 which he directed, and another which he was playing in. He was a tour de force. And if you remember him in the original talking version of A Star is Born, he played the agent. His career was extraordinary. And so when he was, when that infamous period of time occurred, which was called the McCarthy period and the House on Un-American Activities Committee, which McCarthy really wasn't a part of. He had his own witch hunt, which he focused
McCarthy
on.
was never involved in Hollywood. Never.
McCarthy
wasn't involved in the Hollywood blacklist. He was in Washington of being read, but not Hollywood.
Oh, he wasn't. So
he wasn't involved. But the blacklist period is called the McCarthy period. But McCarthy's base of operations was Washington.
But they all testified in front of the House on Un-American Activities Committee, because their testimony is a matter of record, and it's all possible to read in the book 30 Years of Treason, which is entirely about the House on Un-American Activities Committee. But he spearheaded the focus on the arts because he thought that was the hotbed of sedition. So it ruined a lot of lives. It ended a lot of lives, and Lionel's testimony is a matter of record and is a famous testimony. I'm not going to quote it, but for all of you who wish to read it, it's certainly an extraordinary statement. And then when he was blacklisted, he did what any red-blooded actor would do. He got a seat on the stock exchange. He was such an extraordinary man. He actually wound up with a seat on the stock exchange in New York, and had that for a couple of years before he was seduced away back to the silver screen when in the 1960s, end of the 50s, actually, in the 1950s, when a lot of production was going to Rome. And when he went to Italy to do all these movies back to back, I think he did, he must have done about 35 movies back.
He was a huge success in Italy. They loved him. He
was the king of the Via Veneto. He always walked on the Via Veneto with 2 blondes. He had a regular seat at Donne's on the Via Veneto. He was the king.
Do you think Heart to Heart would be a success now?
I don't know. I kind of think people have forgotten how to be charming, and forgotten the value of charm.
That's a wonderful comment. I think you're unfortunately very accurate. And that show was all about charm, wasn't it?
It's all about charm.
About charm.
And a bit of wit.
And those qualities are not in heavy abundance at the moment. I want to go quickly, Stephanie,
I'm afraid they're gone. Because,
I'm looking.
There's no market for it, so there's no model for it.
No, exactly.
So it disappeared, except in retrospect.
And I hope we can still continue to appreciate works of charm from the past.
Oh, let's hope so. Turner
Let's hope
Classic
so.
Movies does their best to
Absolutely.
keep it
Absolutely.
alive.
Many of our listeners and viewers, Stephanie, may not know the extensive theater credits you've had over the years, and that you work pretty consistently in the theater up to this very moment. You were in New York just a year ago with Harry Hamlin at 59 East 59th Street. I want you to know I tried to get a seat. I couldn't
Oh,
get anywhere near the theater. It was the
oh.
hottest ticket in New York. Forget it. I didn't see it. I can't pretend I saw it. I couldn't get near it. You and Harry Hamlin were the hottest ticket in New York, and the run was so brief. Why?
Oh, well, that was what they booked, you know, unfortunately. I think we could have had another 2 weeks,
Oh,
but
2 months, 2 years. You were a huge box office success. You couldn't get anywhere near the theater.
oh, that's great. Yeah, it was beautifully received, and it's an unusual little play, and it was great fun to do. And it was written by a very dear friend of mine, and I loved working with Harry, and it was all just a very nice experience. This last year, I had been speaking with the people at Chichester in England, because for some time I've always wanted to do Mame. Auntie Mame is one of my favorite movies and plays and musicals. But the play that that Rosalind Russell did on Broadway and then turned into this glorious movie is still funny. It's still adorable. It still has the same panache. And whereas most producers balk at the idea of doing the musical because they think it's terribly expensive, the play could be done. And we'd been talking about making some changes that would be a little bit more economical, and doing it at Chichester, and then seeing if it would move to the West End and maybe New York. But
So
of course,
that's
all
an
that.
active conversation. You're talking about that now?
Well, we can't. Nobody can talk about anything in the theater right now, and it's such a tragedy. You know, thank God for the Actors Fund. There are 90,000 jobs that have been lost on Broadway, and it's not obvious in any way as to how or when it's going to be able to come back.
Now, you've worked a lot in England, in London, and in British provinces. How did you get a foothold in the English theater?
Oh, I think it was the first time I appeared in the West End was with RJ, with Robert Wagner, in Love Letters, and we did extremely well. we did very good business. So that was the first foot in the door. Then a few years later, I tried out a new play uh, with the same producer that had put us on in the West End. The play wasn't as good as it seemed. That we all read it and we all liked it on the page, but it didn't play as well. So the following year, so that was 3 years in a row, I did something in the theater in England. The following year, I did a musical in the West End called Matador. So, I once my foot was in the door, I said, I'm not letting it out.
No. And you did a tour of The King and I in England and in this country?
Yes, well, we did that for 10 months. We were on tour in the States for 10 months. So it was, I was the last of the English version Annas, and then we brought it to the same production with pretty much the same sets and costumes and all, and choreographer, with a new director, by U.N.C.L.E, who has,
Yes.
a wonderful history in the theater, and it was great. I remember playing when we opened in Los Angeles, not many people in Los Angeles, my friends in Los Angeles and all, were ever used to seeing me sing. So, and especially that score, which is such an iconic score. And I remember the opening night. The theater was filled with friends and family and all sorts of gang of my supporters. And the opening number, of course, is when Anna and her son arrive in Thailand. It's on the dock, and the boy turns to his mother and says, you know, aren't you ever afraid? And what do you do when you're afraid? And Anna says, well, I whistle. And it's the preamble to I Whistle a Happy Tune. And so in the beginning of the piece, as he begins to sing, it's not actually called for to have applause. But I think that the audience was so relieved that I actually could sing that they started to applaud inappropriately in the beginning of the song. I feel a sigh of relief from all of my friends who said, oh my God, thank God she can sing. All right, so I don't have to say, you know, I have to go backstage and I don't have to try and cover my tracks.
But you've done a lot of musicals over the years, a lot.
I have, yes.
A lot that people might know about who don't know. They know you from Heart to Heart, but they don't know you're the other side. Sunset Boulevard, Applause. A friend of mine saw you in Applause at Paper Mill and said you were just terrific. That it was going to come into Broadway, I think, but it didn't. But you did do it in Paper Mill.
I know we did it in Chicago. I did it in Chicago.
You didn't do Applause at Paper Mill, New Jersey?
No, I didn't. Oh, I did Applause at Paper Mill.
Yes, Applause.
Applause, yes.
Yes.
Oh, I thought, yeah, were we talking about Applause? Oh, yeah. There was also, we did, the most recent Broadway attempt was a play called Gotta Dance that Jerry Mitchell directed and choreographed. And we opened out of town in Chicago, and then they did another production of it, trying to get it back on its feet at the Paper Mill. That's what confused me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're at Paper Mill twice. Before we open the floor to questions from the house, I want to very much ask you about the William Holden Wildlife Foundation and your long and extraordinary service to that program. Can you tell us about that program? But first tell people want to know, how did you first meet William Holden? And then you were his companion for the last 10 years of his life. How did you meet?
Well, I met him, the first time I met him was at I was very young, and it was at a New Year's Eve party at Dominic Dunn's house. Now, every other year, Dominic Dunn would do a New Year's Eve party that was a command performance. I mean, it was a who's who. You were just in awe of everyone. And of course, they were all so delighted to see each other and one another that it was breathtaking. And I had a very dear friend who was a wonderful designer in costume designer for motion pictures, and I was his date. And it was really a crowded room, and I remember backing up onto someone, and as I turned around, I saw this fabulous face and this extraordinary smile, and he said, "Oh, Bill Holden," as if I didn't know, who it was. And I said, I could hardly speak, and he was very kind. and that was the first time I met him. Second time I met him was in a bookshop. Hunter's Bookshop was a famous bookshop in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
A few years later, I was growing up, I was a little bit more grown up, and I was looking at books, those coffee table books about Africa. And I hear this voice behind me which says, saying, "Oh, are you interested in Africa?" And of course, his voice was, I mean, it was so distinguishable. I knew exactly who it was. And I said, "Well, I've traveled to North Africa, but I've never been to East Africa." And I turned around and he said, "Oh, well, I live in East Africa, Bill Holden." I said, he kept introducing me himself as if I wouldn't know who he was. And I said, "Stephanie Powers." And he said, "Oh, yes," very kindly. How maybe by then I had done enough work that he might have seen it. And he said, "Well, if you're ever interested in coming to East Africa," I remember these words exactly. He said, "Look me up." "I'm very easy to find." And I said, "Okay, all right, I will. Thank you for the invitation." And then it was some more years later. I was playing in a tennis tournament. We used to have a lot of tennis tournaments for celebrity pro tennis tournaments. And there was a tennis tournament at La Costa, which is a resort down near San Diego. And Bill used to go there regularly they had a spa, and he would get in shape if he had a movie or something. And he would spend a couple of weeks there, drying out, cleaning out, and getting in shape. And he happened to be there one evening. There was a cocktail party given for us, and he invited me to have a drink. We had a drink. We had a nice little chat. Invited me to dinner. We had dinner. Things progressed nicely.
And then you went to Africa with him, but after his death, you founded the Wildlife Foundation.
Well, you know, Bill, as a form of introducing it, Bill was a conservationist long before the word conservation, extinction of any species was in anybody's vocabulary. He decided, he had an idea to build a game ranch in the late 1950s for the preservation of species, which nobody understood that these species were in peril or going to be in peril. So when the 2,000 acres surrounding the Mount Kenya Safari Club, which he already owned with two other partners, when those 2,000 acres became available, he bought them with an idea to create a game ranch for the preservation of species. He found a wonderful partner to run the operation who was like-minded, and the two of them created this extraordinary effort, which wound up having 37 species of East African wildlife in breeding programs, 5 of which are no longer visible, 5 species of which are no longer visible in the wild. So Bill always wanted to build the education component to wildlife conservation, because without education, the specific animal preservation is only a band-aid. And unless people have the education to understand why it's so crucially important that we preserve these species and what a contribution they make to the food chain and to the environment and to every aspect of life on this planet, most particularly our own, without offering alternatives to habitat destruction, without educating people to biodiversity, why would anybody change their way of life and preserve animals rather than exploit them for their own personal gain? So unfortunately, Bill wasn't able to bring this to fruition during his lifetime. So after his death, I found it a way to keep Bill's memory alive for me, and also execute one of his desires and create something that would be a living, growing tribute to his foresightedness. And that's the way it's turned out. The William Holden Wildlife Foundation Education Center copes with about 11,000 students a year. And there's another 6,000 that we serve in our outreach program that constitutes some building of and refurbishing of schools and involving communities in all sorts of projects where they learn various methods of rejuvenating the land and augmenting deforestation so that it brings back the health of the soil and also climate
Who are
change.
Stephanie? Who are the students? Are they Kenyan people or from everywhere?
All local, all local.
Local. All local.
Yes.
Are you the president of the foundation?
I'm the president. I burp the baby, I change the nappies, and I do just about everything.
And you're a spokesperson for it, of course, aren't you, whenever you have the opportunity? You're the ambassador.
I'm impassioned by the whole subject of conservation, wildlife conservation, species conservation, and biological imperatives of our restoring our soil to reproduce the climate that we once had. And regenerative agriculture is a very important subject, which we are now embarking upon to teach at our schools in our rural areas.
Do you teach at the school? Do you speak there?
Yes, I do.
You do.
Yeah, and I meet with all the families and disseminate information, get the parents involved and the children involved and the schools, and so we're in all service. We serve the whole community.
I detect a teacher in you. I'm a teacher. I can spot a fellow comrade. You're a teacher.
Well, I think we all want to pass something on. And when you get to a certain point where you've learned a few things, you want to hopefully be able to make those things matter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's great work. And you get a lot of attention. I hope people listening will pay attention to the foundation. Mark, I think we can.
Well, may I just say that?
Yes, of course.
I just want to recognize all the faces that of the ladies that are on this Zoom conference as some of our greatest supporters. If it wasn't for their generosity, there's a whole library that their generosity built. Their support is one of the great foundations of our work, and I love you all, and I appreciate so much all of your generosities and the sacrifices you make to contribute to this cause. I love you.
Stephanie, I would love to thank you. This is the most amazing evening. And I just hope that when this is all over and you're in New York, we could host you at the labs in person, because so many people would love to see you in person. And hopefully you'll come back and sing at Feinstein's, because that's where I saw you last, and you were great. Oh. You were fabulous.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, tonight I was looking for all my charts and all of the libretto and everything. I'm trying to get it all collected and organized. Maybe there might be one in the future.
Well, we have in the audience, we have Sandy Durrell, who reviewed you. She's a critic, and she gave you a great review. So if Sandy, are you there, Sandy? Oh, well, anyway, she's there. I'd just like to invite everyone to our next evening with Broadway producer Bonnie Comley and Stuart Lane. And then on the 23rd, we have Lee Grant. She's 97 years old. Can you?
Fabulous, my friend.
Oh, she's wonderful.
She's fabulous.
Yes, and on the 30th, we're going to have Piper Laurie, who's wonderful. And then the Academy Award winner, George Chakiris, April 6th. He's coming out with a new book that he's going to talk about. So you're in good company, Stephanie. It's a wonderful thing that you started this group company.
I'm having dinner with George this week. So
tell him all about how wonderful this was.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. And of course, Foster, you were terrific as always.
Thank you.
Art,
Are
thank
we
you.
going to be able to answer any questions?
Yes.
Yes, we have
can.
a few questions pending. I have a few who have raised their hands, so we'll start with them. Casey, why don't you unmute yourself, ask your question. Mary, you're after that.
Okay. Okay, hello. Wait, Stephanie, where did you go? I don't see you.
I'm here.
Okay, you're muted.
You're muted, Kate.
I'm technologically challenged. I got it. Oh my goodness. I always said if I had the chance to meet you, I would just start speaking in Polish, and conveniently it has just poofed out of my head.
Bardzo przyjemnie poznać.
Oh my God, Stefania, jestem wielką fanką. I'm really glad you brought up MAME, which is one of my favorite movies. And what you said about, producers not wanting to spend the money is related to the question I had for you. I've always been drawn to Golden Age musical theater and what is considered old Hollywood. Sorry. I've heard the phrase old soul numerous times, but I think it's the authentic passion for the work and the story that I'm so drawn to. And that shows in not only the performances, but in the writing and the history of the production. And I'm having such a hard time finding that among my colleagues, specifically directors and producers and writers who value a monetary reward over an artistic one. And, how can we do this quickly and cheaply? And so it's very disheartening. And my question for you was, have you experienced that throughout your career? Or have I just had a string of bad luck and there's still people out there that give a damn about the craft? Thank you.
Well, Casey, I'm sorry that you've had that experience. Yes, of course, that's around. The lack, everybody, you can pick up your phone and be a filmmaker. Everybody can make a movie. It doesn't mean you're a professional. And unfortunately, some of that, the reason that in the days when you call it old Hollywood, the Hollywood that everybody aspires to, it's right. The reason you get into the business in the first place are all those images and all those extraordinary films that we would love to have been in. They were made by craftsmen. They were made by people who learned from craftspeople in every aspect of it, whether it was the lighting cameraman, the operator, the man who moved the lights, the person who served you coffee. Everybody was an apprentice. And everybody looked forward to learning the craft so that they could participate in the playground. Today, everybody's a star overnight. And I think haste makes waste. I think it also leads to overnight successes that then disappear the next time. There's not a lot of staying power. So by saying that, that means that the long term wasn't thought about. It was all the short-term gain. When you go to acting school now, it's the cult of personality rather than approaching it from the point of view that you're putting on somebody else's skin. And when you see wonderful performances, have you seen Hillbilly Elegy? Have you seen that movie? Worth seeing.
Say for me one more time. I'm going to write that down.
Glenn Close will probably win.
Oh my goodness.
Whoops, you knocked yourself over. There you are.
I can't believe I dropped you. Okay.
So Glenn Close will probably receive an Oscar this year for her role in that film for best supporting actress. But Amy Adams is extraordinarily good in it, and because she put the skin on of another person. She wasn't Amy Adams she was the character. It's another approach to acting. It's not the cult of personality, it's the cult of the character. And I think there's a greater reward for actors when that's the object of the exercise. Because I think the personality cult wears thin for the artist in you. It may not wear thin for an immediate return, but where do you go from there? Where do you go from there once you've just shown everybody what your personality is, and where's the other side of it? When does the other side come around? What's really kind of disappointing is the lack of communication now when you're on a set, because the director's not next to the camera. The director is way far away. Lots of the younger directors don't know how to talk to actors, don't know how to stand there and rehearse with an actor before they then go back and watch their little screen. Because no matter what's happening in the background, if the audience doesn't care about the actor acting that role, then you don't have a movie. So the many innovations that have occurred, the ease of which it is now possible to make a film, have changed the industry dramatically. But craftsmanship will always show. Seriousness and the approach to an artistic point of view is there. You have to seek it out. It's not always obvious, but don't lose heart. And just keep fighting the good fight for more challenging work and better scripts.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Even if you have to write them yourself.
Yes. That has crossed my mind a time or two, or 20.
Mark?
Well, thank you.
All right, so Mary, would you unmute yourself and ask your question? Lisa, you're next. You're muted, Mary.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Good, Mary.
I wanted to say that it was great seeing you perform twice in One November Yankee. And
Thank
you were wonderful. And it was so nice seeing you after the show twice. Thank you for your time to come out to see all the people who showed up for your show. It was wonderful. And I loved you in Heart to Heart. And you've always been such a sweetheart every time I've seen you perform. And get to talk to you after the show. And I hope when things return back to normal in New York, that you come back to New York to do another show or a cabaret show.
Thank you, Mary. I hope so too.
And that and we also are dog lovers too. And so we have a little dog as well. So we have a little Chirini. We got her in November after we lost our other dog. And a little boy. And this is what he looks like.
I hate to interrupt you, but we only have a few minutes and we
Oh,
want to.
I just want to say, and thank you for hosting the event. And it was great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Mary.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Lisa Lamont, would you unmute and ask your question?
Lisa,
Hi, Stephanie. How are
how are
you?
you? I
Great.
can't see you. Your video is not.
Oh, I don't know how to do that. I turned it off before.
Okay, well, we can hear you.
So this was great. Thank you for doing this. This was wonderful. And we saw your dog, Sonny. And one of the girls wanted to know how you got your bird. And it's a great story because you told it to me in London. So if you could tell how you got your
Oh,
bird.
Pabuka's not with us tonight, but I have a parrot that's been in my life for 48 years. It's my longest relationship. Does that say something about me? she knows everything, and she knows how to push all my buttons. I was in San Francisco years ago, 48 years ago. I was doing a television show called Streets of San Francisco with Carl Malden and Michael Douglas. And the show was a 2-part show. So that meant we were going to work for 2 weeks and only have 1 day off in the middle of the 2 weeks, which was going to be a Sunday. So I made arrangements with my brother, who lived in San Francisco at the time, that we would get together on that Sunday. And we did. And he wanted to take me to a new area, or a newly renovated area of San Francisco, which was a historical area that had gone downhill and was now being yuppified. You know, it was being restored, and there were lots of lovely shops and lots of lovely restaurants. And so we found a restaurant that we liked, and it had a garden. And so we made a reservation, and they said we'd have to wait for half an hour. So we said, fine, we'd go looking around. And right next door to the parking lot was a shop, and it had nothing but birds in the shop. And we walked in, and there was this gorgeous, fabulous Moluccan cockatoo, big white Moluccan cockatoo, out on a stand. All the birds were out. They were climbing around and all of this. It was like a fantasy land for birds. And the birds, and I said, hello, and the bird said, hello, and did this, you know, and we're laughing and having a good time with the birds, and the proprietor comes out. And I said, this is an amazing bird store. I said, these birds can't be for sale, can they? And she said, no, well, most of them are boarding, and that cockatoo that you were speaking with belongs to Melvin Belli, who was one of the great historic, very flamboyant lawyers in San Francisco. And she said, oh, but I said, well, it stands to reason. Where are you going to find birds for sale that are like this? I mean, they're fabulous. And she said, oh, we have one. And it was like a fisherman going, you know, she found a good fish. I was the fish. And she pointed to a shelf with some boxes on it. And out from the box came this green bird, a little Amazon parrot with a yellow nape. Now, a parrot exactly like this had belonged to a friend of my mother's. And every time this girlfriend of my mother's would go out of town, this parrot called Rosita would come to our house. So I had already had a very lovely relationship with a parrot that looked exactly like this. So I put my hand up and said, oh my goodness, to my brother, this is just like Rosita. And the parrot came on my hand and walked on my shoulder and sat there. And of course, she was cuddling and saying hello and all this. And we're having a wonderful time. My brother looks at his watch and says, oh, we better get back to the restaurant for reservations ready. And the woman said, oh, are you having lunch in the garden? And we said, yes. And she said, well, why don't you take the bird with you? We take our birds over there all the time. They love it. So I took the bird to lunch, and every time I put something in my mouth, the bird reached across and pulled my cheek and ate from my mouth. Well, of course, I fell in love. I mean, it was instantaneous. So I bought the bird. I bought the bird and bought a little carrying cage and a little miniature stand, so that it was with 2 cups, so I could feed it and put some water in, and it would have a little stand to hold on to. And I went back to my hotel, And my hotel was one of those ubiquitous motel hotels, and where you have one long chest of drawers, desk and everything, and a mirror and a television set, and the beds are opposite. So I put the set up the cage and got everything ready, and took the bird into the bathroom where I was going to have a shower, get ready for bed, and I put what I was now calling it papuga, which is a Polish word meaning parrot. And I put papuga up on the door of the shower, and I started brushing my teeth. And I hear papuga behind me brushing her teeth. She's making the same sound that I am, and we're laughing, and she's laughing. I turn the shower on, and all the steam starts and she's laughing, and we're having a wonderful time. Take a shower, get dressed for bed, put the parrot on the perch, get into bed, start studying my lines for the next day, watch the news, shut the television off, said good night, papuga. Well, see you in the morning. I turn the light off, and I hear flap, 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 crash, 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 crash. I turn the light on, no bird, fallen off the perch. And climbing up at the end of the bed and heading straight toward me is papuga, making all kinds of noises. And she comes up here, squats on my chest, and I figured that's where she's going to be the rest of the night. So I put the cover over her, turned the light out, and I hate to say it, but we slept together on the first night. That's my papuga story.
All right, why don't we take it now to Ruth? Why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Stephanie.
Where are you? Oh, hi, Ruth. How are you?
Hi. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
So nice to actually meet you, although not meeting, but closest I'll probably ever get to meeting you. I just wanted to ask, what's been the most influential part of your career?
Where are you, Ruth?
Scotland.
Wow, what time is it there?
It is 3 o'clock in the morning.
My God, well, you get the prize, don't you? You're up the latest or earliest. My goodness, well, thank you so much. What was your question?
Thank you for doing this. What's been the most influential part of your career?
Oh boy, let's see. Well, influential in what way? In my life or in my career? The pivotal, I guess, the success of Heart to Heart is an unusual moment, because people, in the days when doing a television series on one of 3 networks was a bit of a monopoly. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, my, Dina is serving me some dinner. Doing a television show on either ABC, NBC, or CBS had a great a draw, because there were not very many choices. No, that's not yours, that's mine. Look who's there. You didn't have a lot of choices as we do today, so people were more focused on following a single television show than they are now. I think it's more difficult to get people's attention. So the share of the audience that we were getting was sometimes 40% of the audience was watching Heart to Heart on a weekly basis. Wow. That's a phenomenal amount of people to have access to. So,
I think I was about 4 when I started watching it.
So I think that was the most influential part of my career, and it certainly opened the doors to everything that happened subsequently.
We should have time, I think, for one more question before we turn it back to Foster. So Tara, you get the last question. Unmute yourself.
Where's Tara? Tara, I don't see you.
Looks
I
like
don't hear you and I don't see you. Where are
looks like we just lost her. All right, so then we'll turn the last question over to Rachel. Yes.
Hi, that's me. Okay. Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, the Lambs, for hosting this. Thank you, Ms. Powers, for doing this. This is the highlight of my year so far. My question is, what are you reading right now? And or do you have any reading recommendations for?
Oh, this is great. That's interesting. Yes, I'm always reading. I read
English
a number
major.
of books. I read books, a number of books at the same time. It's sort of, and right now I'm reading. I missed reading A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Did you ever hear about that?
Oh yes.
I missed it. I'm reading it when I should have read it. So I'm having a wonderful time reading it. And at the same time, I'm reading about the Ottoman Empire because I really didn't know that much about the Ottoman Empire. And since it ruled a huge piece of geography for 500 years, I think, and still has tentacles into that part of the world, I think it's important to understand the past in order to understand the present.
Thank you so much.
With that, I'm going to turn it back to Foster for the final words, and then we'll say our thank yous.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie, for doing this. And I just want to ask your next project. I think you're going to Kenya as soon as you can, and you do have homes there. You're a dual citizen of United States and Kenya. Is that true?
That's correct. Yes. I'm not a citizen. I'm a dual resident of Kenya and the United States.
And so you have a deep attachment to Kenya.
I do. I have a deep attachment and a deep commitment.
And do you have a home there?
Yes, I do.
You do. So you go and you have a home in London or a base in London.
I do. I have a base in London. Yeah.
A base in London. So you're a woman of 3 cities, 3 continents.
I'm a woman of 3 distinctive environments. Yeah.
Okay. And that shows her energy and her enthusiasm. And I think we know the reason that Stephanie Powers has had such a long and continuing career. Thank you.
Foster, you've been a delight to speak with and to talk to and to be interviewed by. And I want to thank everybody once again for having watched this. Ruth, go to bed.
And Stephanie, on behalf of the Lambs, thanks so much. You've been a wonderful guest. This will be posted tomorrow afternoon on our website under recent events. And with that, we say thank you to everybody and good night.
Thank you, Stephanie. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Stephanie.
Good night.
And
Good night.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
Stephanie.
Night.